I haven't had a lot of updates on the car for a little while. Obviously, the core support's out. I went ahead and pulled that since it had a couple of crusty spots on the top. These cars, for some reason in the Midwest, really like to hold water on the very underside of the core support, basically right above where the radiator sits. So I I pulled that out, and it's up at my buddy Corey's shop, getting prepped for powder, along with Cerakote on all the associating hardware. It's a good time to do that since I actually had a little whoopsie on this radiator hose. It's actually rubbed against the frame down here on the side, so it had a little bit of wear on it. Don't want to have a blown radiator hose. So if anybody's looking for a lower, pick up a Dayco 71703. They are like $11 at Advanced Auto Parts right now. They also come with this corrugated shield section, which is what I've seen a lot of people really require on these cars. Sometimes you also will still have to trim that lower section to get it to fit right. And while that is out, I can't remember if I've talked about this, but this is a new Champion 2 or 3-pass radiator. So it'll accept OEM fans, which is what I was looking for, even though they do sell an aluminum shroud and aftermarket fans, but that would require extra wiring work. This is supposed to be kind of a hop-in and cruise kind of deal, so I'm not really looking to modify wiring any further than absolutely necessary. So obviously it'll take the original factory hardware. I know a lot of guys, at least in the Midwest and in the North where I am, here in Illinois, we have issues with the upper and lower bolts. They'll actually strip out on the backside. They'll rot. But you can just go ahead and grab 4 1/4 inch by 2 or 2.5. I did a 2.5, and it's literally right here, just outside the bracket. So I think I would stick with a 2.5-inch lag bolt. I just got mine with a 7/16" head and sent them home. I did have to modify the bottom bracket since it didn't really want to take the bolts and hold them all that well, even though it was the correct size. But it worked out a-okay. So aside from freshening up the cooling system, just radiator, I'm going to keep the OEM condenser that's still in the car. Unfortunately, I think my blower belt drive is misaligned, so you can see it's puked all the grease out of one of the bearing pulleys. There's actually 2 bearings in there, so I have a new set of those on the way coming, along with a new set of hood struts for the front, and I also have a brand new coolant reservoir sitting in there, but that is not the focus of today. A lot of B-body people talk about sloppy steering, even though these cars have a faster factory ratio than the Caprices or the Roadmasters or the cop cars of the time. And a lot of that is usually caused by super worn front ends. So I ended up putting a Pro-Forged kit in the car, and it tightened it up a little bit in a good alignment. Helped that out quite a bit too. So I knew it wasn't the Pitman arm, anything like that. I knew it wasn't outer tie rods. So basically the only culprit left is the steering shaft. So now that it's actually kind of visible, the steering shaft down here, I've seen people replace them with the Jeep XJ shaft, which is a super budget-friendly way of doing it. There's nothing wrong with doing it, although you do have to modify the Jeep shaft a little bit. Cunningham Motorsports actually make it, or Cunningham Machine, they actually make a super perfect direct bolt-in shaft. I think it's actually meant for an 88 to 94 Silverado, but they're about $200, so they're honestly way more expensive than the Jeep shaft, or just putting joints in your existing shaft. But these also come, you can option them pre-coated. I think mine ended up being like $215 shipped from them. And so we're going to go ahead and unbox that and then get the old shaft out and throw this one in. Alright, so we're going to open up the new steering shaft, see what comes with it, take a quick look at it. Sticker, of course, got to have that. Here's my invoice. So just initial impressions, the joints are really nice and tight. They still move freely just like a joint should. Another thing I've seen a lot of people like about these shafts is that they don't actually have to modify them. I don't know, honestly, how much modification actually goes into utilizing the Jeep XJ shaft, but I have seen people, there's a plastic retainer that you have to melt in, and some guys have had to modify them further. Obviously, you can't quote me on that since I don't really Don't really know a whole lot about the Jeep shaft ever since I pretty much made up my mind a while ago that I was going to be going this direction. So that's kind of what it looks like. Super nice beefy yokes. And I believe these take an off-the-shelf available joint if it's something you need to service later on down the line. You know, if you get into an accident or something and it fucks up the joints. So this is definitely the kind of thing that I like to see a lot of these small businesses do. Unfortunately, if you do go looking for one of these, they don't actually have them directly listed under the website, but if you do go to the search bar and just, if you get on their website, Cunningham Machine, and you type in Impala, it will take you straight to this. It will specifically annotate it in the comments section that it is directly a direct drop-in replacement for a 94 to 96 Impala. So let's go ahead and get the old shaft out and get this one thrown in. While we're getting in here, I would recommend centering up the steering wheel and then turning it exactly 1/4 turn to the right, so that way you have access to the 5/8 nut that's up here on the one side of the fastener, and then I believe the head on it is also a 5/8. So we'll go ahead and get these out first. We'll pull the nut and the bolt out. The shaft should separate without a whole lot of issues. You may need to squirt some oil, some penetrating grease up in here since it's got a spline fit, and then we'll go ahead and get that dropped off. Fuck. So like I said, if you turn it just a little over 1/4 of a turn, you should have pretty clear access, even if you have tri-wire long tube headers down here. You'll also have a flange surface exposed. If you look at your factory steering shaft, obviously I would recommend going out and actually looking at your car. There's a flange surface. You can take a pry bar and give it just kind of a couple good gentle whacks to get it to start moving a little bit. Since the steering shaft's going to have some give to it, you'll have to work it off those splines. So that's going to take me a minute, so we'll come back when I have the rest of the steering shaft out. Alright, so here is the factory steering shaft pulled out of the car. The bottom bolt, I believe, is a 11mm or 10mm. The top is actually a 15, I believe, 13, 14, or 15. And it's just the nut itself. It's actually got just a square flanged stud that goes through. So there's no head on the other side. So if you strip this off, you're pretty well fucked. So I'm going to go ahead and pull this apart really quick. So you can see there is a little keyway that's cut into it. There you go, now you can see it right here. You also see the Cunningham new shaft has one that's also included with it, so that's something very important to pay attention to. It's I think it's to keep tension on the shaft, but I've also seen people take the protective sleeve off of their original shaft, which, you know, this is what it looks like. This clips onto one of your power steering lines. It's on the gearbox. But I would say that's pretty well fucked. And the rubber boot had completely separated and torn from it. So, I mean, there's not a whole lot of grease left in here, which kind of sucks. But the bottom side is kind of like a rubber, almost fabric-looking Quibo in it, something along those lines. But this was also in slightly, ever so slightly rough shape. And this is what I was talking about. You can see in there that this is actually splined. So, you know, it's pretty easy to tell which side goes where on the new shaft. You match spline with spline and go ahead and send her home. So I'm going to go ahead and get all this put together, figure out if this is actually going to be useful to me or not, just as a protective purpose, because this was kind of a pain in the ass to pull out of the car with the blower drive and the ABS relocation in the way. So I'm going to go ahead and get my poop in the group here, and then we'll go ahead and get this side-by-side comparison to see what they look like, see the difference in, you know, how they're put together, and then we'll go ahead and throw it in the car. And really quick, while I still have this apart and I'm paying attention to it, so you see a lot of people that will go ahead and realign cars, you know, specifically 91, 96 B-body cars, or, you know, SSs, since, you know, most guys seem to put their money into these. But these also have a traditional U-joint up here at the top underneath this torn boot. You know, on one side of it seems fairly, I mean, it's still with minimal force I can wiggle it. This side, there's probably a good 1/8 inch worth of slop into it before it even engages the joint. So I would probably mark this one off as pretty well fucked. So I got the cover all cleaned up, and it was something else I was looking at. I'm going to use my nifty little Nebo headlight here. If you look at the hardware for it, it's actually a hex head, or it's like a Allen wrench drive stud that goes through with a lock nut on it. So that's something else. I'm going to double check because the splines on this actually look like a slightly different size than the OEM one. So I am going to go ahead and verify that this fits before I go any further. Alright, while I was looking at this and tinkering around, I don't believe that steering shaft cover will work on this. Obviously the shafts I think are very similar diameter and it will fit through there, but I think the joint style and the fact that it also has that protruding stud and lock nut on it will prevent you from using that. However, my suspicions were quite thankfully not true, and it's going to be a bit difficult to see down there, but the lower part of the shaft does fit perfectly over the gearbox side of the spline, so I have the stud set. I'm going to go ahead and tighten down that lock nut, and then we'll get to putting together the upper and getting that bunch of cramp reassembled. I'll get my charge pipe, my inlet pipe for the blower put back on, and the filter put back together so that we don't have to mess with that later on. And then I'm going to make sure that this junk doesn't fall apart. And that's all she wrote. Easy peasy. You can see the new steering shaft here. Fits super nice, especially around my little hand bent ABS line relocation there. Did a little pry bar action to clear the blower drive. I would say this is a super beginner level thing. It's just something I've been meaning to do for a long time, and obviously now with car in storage for winter and the face off of it, I now have one time and space. This would be a way easier job with way less disassembly if you had the factory ABS location and you didn't have a blower drive in the way. So if you have a stock or a stockish or like a head cam or an NA383 car, you know, anything from wild to mild, as long as there's not junk in the way on the driver's side directly above the steering gearbox, I think you'll be A-okay. So that is kind of an overview of the Cunningham Machine B-body or 88 to 94 Silverado steering shaft. So thanks for watching.